think we are ready to start. So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to today's webinar, Best Practices of the topDNS Initiative, Standards and Frameworks for Evidencing Abuse Online. My name is Lars Steffen. I'm Director International at the ECO Association and your host today. And today, our speaker is Jeff Betzer. He's the CEO of CleanDNS and also a very active member of the topDNS Initiative. This is the part 2 of this best practice webinar series. Part 1 has taken place 1 month ago. That was about how to reduce abuse through quality, where Brian Sobolik from PIR and Theo Gertz from Real Time Register explained how the QPI program of PIR is helping to reduce malicious domain name registrations, and how this is a benefit not only for the registry, but also for the registrar and the resellers behind them. And today, we would like to focus on standards and frameworks for evidencing abuse online. The next webinar of this series, part 3, will take place in August on Thursday the 10th, where Theo Gertz from Real Time Register again will show us how to investigate online abuse with free tools. So pencil this please in your calendar. You can find the registration and also all further information about this on the ECO website. Also on the website, you can find further information about the topDNS initiative itself. So the members of the topDNS initiative are CentralNIC, CleanDNS. The newest additions to the group are InternetX and Ionos, IQ Global, LeaseWeb, NIC-AT, PIR, Real Time Register, and VeriSign. And if you're interested in participating in this group as well, please reach out to Jeff or to me, and we are always happy to help and to explain how you can be a part of topDNS ECO's initiative to fight DNS abuse. Before I hand over to Jeff, just going quickly through the housekeeping rules. So this webinar is being recorded. Of course, this recording will be available after the meeting. You are muted throughout the webinar. You can always ask questions. So on the dashboard on the right-hand side of your screen, you can also use the questions part to ask questions to Jeff, and I will read them out. But you can also submit your question verbally by using the raise your hand button. We will unmute you. Before you ask your questions, please state your name and affiliation, and then we can have a discussion. And after the webinar, you will have the opportunity to participate in a short survey to provide feedback if this webinar has been helpful and giving us the opportunity to learn and also to improve our services. And with this, I would like to stop here and to hand over to Jeff. Jeff, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Lars, and greetings from the East Coast of the United States, where I can tell you that being indoors with air conditioning is the better place to be, considering the outdoor heat. Thank you so much for attending, and I hope to spark some thought and maybe some consideration on this topic that will continue long after this seminar is over. As Lars said, I'm Jeff Betzer, and I'm the CEO of CleanDNS. So let's get into the presentation. So does my policy need evidence, or does my evidence dictate the policy? What we're going to be talking about today is basically we have a topic that has agreement on what the policy should be toward resolving it. There's an agreement that things are changing and addressing certain types of online harms and abuses at the DNS level is the appropriate thing to do. However, when you have the agreement that that should happen, you need to get into the details. And the details here is going to be talking about evidence. So with policy expectations, DNS abuse policy must follow 3 simple rules. Is it the appropriate action taken by the appropriate party at the appropriate time? And this is all about mitigating harm. This is about reducing victimization being caused by these DNS abuses. So we've spent quite a bit of time within the community, within the ICANN world, within outside of the ICANN world with Internet and Jurisdiction and topDNS and the DNS Abuse Institute, really agreeing that this is a topic that should be managed. There should be managing the abuse but let's work on the details. And the work so far to date, of course, is we've got the framework to address abuse, which talks about the types of abuse and how it should be addressed and where. We have quite a bit of work with the Internet and Jurisdiction Policy Framework, where the DNS level action to address abuse should lie. The Security and Stability Advisory Committee for ICANN put out SAC 115 about how an interoperable approach is taking care of these issues. And then, of course, ICANN's clarity of message and expectations have come out showing that ICANN is also aligned with moving toward reducing abuses in a formal methodology. But that really does bring us to the point of, if we've agreed that an appropriately evidenced abuse should be mitigated or should be disrupted, what is that appropriate level of evidence? So the term evidencing as a term has some weight to it. I mean, well evidenced, even more so. So I encourage you to do it, whether it's looking it up on Google or looking it up on a web dictionary or hell, even ChatGPT. But evidence is something that furnishes proof. Evidence is anything that can be used to prove something, like the evidence presented at a trial, of course, or the trail of breadcrumbs that is evidence of the path that Hansel took through the woods. I had to bring in the German fairy tale based on our host of topDNS and Eco. So let's talk evidence versus proof. There's a difference, right? Proof requires evidence, but not all evidence constitutes proof. Proof is a fact that demonstrates something to be real or true. Evidence is information that may lead one to believe something to be true or real. When we're talking about DNS abuse, we're asking operators of the DNS to be the arbiter who's going to decide whether or not there's enough evidence, excuse me, for them to take action against the domain. So proof is difficult. Well evidenced is less difficult. So well evidenced is where there's enough proof that action can be taken. And to get there, of course, we get to the topic of today's presentation, which is we need standards and frameworks on evidencing DNS abuse so that at some point in the near future, hopefully, the DNS operator community can agree that these are the evidencing points that are the demonstration that this action has taken place and it's enough evidence to take action. So standards. Standards, an idea or a thing used as a measure, a norm, a model in comparative evaluations. A framework is a basic structure underlying a system, concept, or text. Basic definitions. We have technical abuses that are currently within the gTLD world, within the ICANN contract framework, to be addressed that are addressable at the DNS level. We've got phishing, malware, botnets, and farming, and spam, of course, when used as a vector for other abuses. And these technical abuses all still need to have a standard by which what evidence applies to there's a, between the ICANN world and the actual practice within the registrar and registry, there is a standard on what constitutes evidence for these types of harms. A standard requires the demonstration that the only logical explanation that can be derived from the facts is that the domain was registered for this abusive purpose. I like to call that a DRAP because it made me think of Admiral Akbar in Star Wars saying it's a DRAP. Man, having everyone muted and no laughter makes that joke just fall flat. And that no other logical explanation can be inferred from the evidence. Thus, if the evidence package can demonstrate this standard, the policy can be enforced. So evidence packages, yes, is yet another topic here, right? Because how do you want the evidence presented to you? Well, do you want the evidence presented to you in an email sent to an abuse@email address where there's a narrative and someone's telling the story of how this domain was used to harm them and what happened and what their losses and what cryptocurrency and what type of scam it was? Or do you want an evidence package that's standardized? And I am a strong proponent of XRF, which is the abuse reporting format. It's a standardized format with fields and nomenclature that's expandable and flexible that allows you to standardize the process of reporting abuses, and have a match to fields and categories, which allows for a validation or verification of that data when it's presented. The components are primarily textual, but they're based on abuse types, because obviously each type of abuse may have a different type of evidence presented to contribute to that model. But of course, you also need things like screen captures and potential content. And honestly, some types of abuses, logged behaviors captured through DNS traffic may be the best way to evidence the abuse. So what are the components of an evidence package? Well, direct copies or image captures that demonstrate the abuse, contextual support of the data, structure, behaviors, date, timestamps, relevance. That's very important, because that also will tell you, did this domain come into being and get delegated for the purpose of the abuse, or has this domain been around for quite some time and it's been compromised, and thus the owner of the domain or the hosting of the domain is unaware of the abuse? So that is the relevance and the action point we talked about in the earlier slides. But also the reporting of the technical stack details, the registry, the registrar, the content delivery network, the hosting, the mail provider. Where are all the pieces of this domain's abuse coming from? And bluntly, which components demonstrate that abuse? Obviously, a domain being used in phishing or spam can potentially have nothing at the A record, all the abuses happening at the MX level, and the way to demonstrate is going to be captures of those emails where that activity is happening. So let's talk about evidence expansion now, because we have that which can be reported, but we also have many parties in the ecosystem that utilize the internet for commerce, for social, for all the other purposes the internet has been used for. There's a lot of other places where data is being captured and used to make decisions on what traffic is allowed based on behaviors. So I call this the carrier approach. So for example, if the domain was detected by a carrier, let's say it's a mobile or wireless or a mail provider, email provider, that's being used, they're using a model. Let's say it's a prescribed volume. So at the point where the domain is seen in a SMS messaging model, let's say the multiple is they've seen it 1,000 times in a couple of seconds. So a super level of usage that would demonstrate it's not a human, and subsequently is blocked by the carrier. So the carrier has said this domain has occurred. We have reports that it's either self-detected or reports from consumers that this domain is being used for this purpose. It's a identity theft. It's a phish. It's some other type of fraud. It's a catfish. The carrier then blocks it. So the evidence package may be from a carrier. They measured this volume. The domain is less than X days old. It's a recently delegated domain or a domain registered for an abusive purpose. Then they took action against it and they blocked it. That can be an evidence package from a carrier to a registry or registrar or hosting company to say, this is what occurred, this is the evidence of what occurred, and this is the action we took. And perhaps the registry or registrar would take that evidence package and say, yes, we will actually take action against that domain because of that evidence package. There's evidence-based correlation. If the domain was created for the sole purpose of acting as a proxy or a relay to an abuse. At CleanDNS, we recently had a series of events coming out of Asia where there was a large number of domains in the tens of thousands registered across multiple TLDs and multiple registrars, but with the exact same scam, which was a presentation of a page that had a QR code on it, and the QR code went directly to a malware dropper to infect the mobile phone or mobile platform of the user. So the domain was created for the sole purpose of an abuse. Its sole purpose was this QR code that would then drop malware to your phone if you went to the QR code. If a quantity of domains were registered in concert by a single entity, and a percentage of those domains have been evidence as being utilized for abuse, that's another evidence correlation that can be used. I've seen some providers decide, yes, there are 100,000 domains registered during this discount program by this one particular registrant. The first 10,000 were used for abuse. The second 10,000 going now up to 20,000 have been used for abuse. And they decided to take action against the whole 100,000 registrations, assuming the rest will be abusive as well. I'm not advocating that's the only way to do it, but it is another way to look at the quantity of the domains that were registered and do the correlation for evidence. Unless obvious from the evidence available, contextual account review could be far more effective and readily confirmed at the registrar level. So evidencing abuse. Phishing. Let's demonstrate it via evidence that, one, the domain is structured in the name format to be confusingly similar to a legitimate domain. And that's, of course, using alternate character sets for I's and ones, example, zeros and O's, all those other types with alternate language sets in the IDNs that allow this process to happen, or simply the word secure and bank are used in URL string, or there should be a dot between secure and bank, and there is no longer a dot because it's not a third level, it's just a second level domain. Those are all indicators of a phish. The content of a domain's hosted content is designed to induce the individual to reveal personal information, passwords, credit card numbers, etc. Number three, the age of the domain demonstrates that it was registered for an abusive purpose or a DRAP. The evidence package can be relevant details of registration, hosting, age, the lore. What was the lore that got the target victim in? Was that lore a brand name, a gift card? Was it attempting to look like their bank, their e-commerce platform, what have you? And of course, a screen capture of data or a credential grab showing that that was what was attempted at the time that it was detected. Evidencing abuse for malware. Malware is a little tougher. I would hesitate to say, with the exception of maybe 5 registries and registrars, in-house malware expertise to decompile malware and determine what they're doing is not an expertise most registries and registrars have in-house. So to demonstrate via evidence that the domain is hosting files that will load files onto a victim system, that these files contain a payload to cause harm, ransomware, data compromise, etc., and a verified payload content by variant or campaign. Now, how can you get that? Well, there's multiple providers that do malware analysis that have open APIs or even just graphic user interface websites that allow you to drop the URL link with the alleged malware into it, and they will do the analysis, what's called a sandbox detonation, to verify it. But that's an evidence package you can work with. A virus total or a CrowdStrike has validated this malware and told you the details. That's good enough for an evidence package in most cases. Botnets are tougher. It's a network of private computers infected with a malicious software and are controlled as a group without the owner's knowledge. So to send spam messages, to do other types of distributional harm, how should this be evidenced? And I'll leave that question unanswered because I don't have a good answer for how to evidence botnets yet. And I would love to see future work on that. But I kind of touched on this a bit before, but of course there's evidencing by volume. The total number of domains involved, the pattern determination, and the correlative data, across provider, across the registries and registrars, just like that pattern I mentioned before with the malware downloader by QR code. The correlative data shows how big the scam was, that it was hitting multiple registries and multiple registrars with the exact same scam. And interesting enough, that was also a price-independent one. There were domains that were on the cheap side per year in that scam, as well as some relatively expensive ones. And they were used unilaterally. So pattern alone is not enough. Evidence exists that can demonstrate an abuse is occurring. You need evidence exists that the behavior has been identified and replicated across a statistically significant sample of the identified pattern. Just because the bad guy or bad gals or bad persons registered a bunch of domains that were 5 random numbers and 10 random letters .tld, and you find that there were several thousand in that pattern registered, doesn't mean simply that that pattern alone is enough to demonstrate there's abuse on all those domains. So what is statistically significant for any given case is really subjective and can be tempered by the impact or urgency of what the online harm is. So what other types of abuse can be addressed with this standard approach? So farming, I add here because fishing and farming are deceptively similar, but the primary difference between fishing and farming is basically that fishing is an external mechanism that brings you to the fish, whether it comes from SMS messaging, through email. Farming is when you think you're going one place with the browser and you end up somewhere else, and that's where the harm happens to try and steal PII to get account information to get you to log in. So farming is significantly underreported because farming is usually reported as fishing. There are several definitions out there as well that are difficult with farming because there are references to DNS cache poisoning being the methodology for farming, where in reality, it's not the methodology that causes the farming, it's the harm at the other end, which is the gathering of PII or information to harm to victimize the consumer or the victim. Spamvertising is one where large volumes that are sometimes cloaked as standard spam, where it's actually depending on where the person geophysically sits who clicks on the link is the variant on what gets served back to them when they go to the browser session. And many times it just looks like standard spam to a lot of the consumers, but in the targeted group that they're targeting in a particular geo region or what other specificity they have, it's specifically targeted and there's a different result. And same thing for scamvertising. Spamming, of course, is SMS spam. We've got smishing, which of course is phishing by SMS message or text messaging. We have types of abuse like deceptively similar, where there are obvious correlations on the timing and the placement and the delivery and the age of the domain, but the harm is not clearly there yet, but the deceptively similar looks to be a pattern that can be approached. There's a large amount of charity fraud that comes out within hours or days of natural disasters. I think there could be a standard addressed for those. You know, a charity fraud comes out and it says we are the Red Cross in this region and we're doing this type of money raising, and you look into the charity and the domain is 3 days old, but the certifications they claim to have as a charity take up to a year to apply for. There things like that can be standards in that evidence. Of course, you've got narcotic sales, which has been addressed. I won't go into too much details there because that is an illegality issue. But of course, there are crypto scams. And I lastly put on the standard of harms here, human trafficking. And you'd say, well, how is that an online harm? And my answer will come up in the next slides. So we've got scam via spam, where the delivery of the scam comes in through mass marketing spam, investment frauds, fake employment opportunities and job scams. There's been well-documented cases of the fake job scams drawing in people into human trafficking and forced labor into scam centers, where they're being drawn in, basically enslaved persons, to then be forced to work in a scam center to bring in more scams and to bring in more people to get more labor in. Fake job scams include, reshipping scams and false check scams. And many of the people doing this are people being human trafficked. So this entire industry of scams via spam is a harm in itself to victimization. A recent report that came out from the Better Business Bureau stated that fake job scams have cost the American victims $840,000 in the first quarter of 2023 alone, just based on the data that they have. And they have a limited data set that I've seen, and I can tell you that that number is likely significantly higher because that is reported losses, not actual losses that have been documented by people that didn't report it to the authorities or didn't report it to the Better Business Bureau. So as I mentioned, human trafficking, I'll go into some more detail here. Scams and fraud tied to human trafficking. The Philippine police rescued over 2,700 people who were working in various scam centers who've been drawn in by these job scam frauds by email. The frauds involving cryptocurrency accounted for $2.57 billion in the US alone in victim losses, roughly 5 times greater than the total losses of phishing victims. In Israel, seized over $1.7 million in cryptocurrency from the Iranian military and Hezbollah. So these scams, which are a nuisance to the majority of us, where our filters, our email inbox filters are keeping them out, they don't get in, or we know they're scams, so we delete them and ignore them, are still causing significant victimization and damage and can be addressed and evidenced. Again, I'm not advocating that these have to be actioned at the DNS level of the registrar or registry. While they could, I'm not advocating that's necessarily the right place for it. But there's certainly evidencing standards can be created that they can be then addressed at the right level where they should be addressed. So my conclusions, standardized evidencing allows for a rapid correlation and mitigation of abuse domains by the appropriate party. Evidencing thresholds need to be established. CleanDNS as a company is using evidencing thresholds for the work we do, but they're by no means fully accepted across the industry. And I'm not saying that my evidencing standards should be fully accepted across the industry, but I think the industry does need to set evidencing standards so we all can agree what is a well-evidenced report of a DNS abuse. Online harms can be addressed via standardized evidence packages to inform policy. And there are more opportunities that exist to reduce victimization using this methodology. At the end of the day, the better standards we have for evidence and the validation of that evidence once presented means that we can reduce the period of time where the domain is being used for victimization. And by doing that, we're reducing victimization overall, the number of people, et cetera, that are being hit by this and hurt by this. So good work to do, and I look forward to where this effort continues and goes from this point forward. I will then open up for discussions and turn the floor back over to Lars for next steps in the webinar.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you for this very interesting presentation. I would like to give the opportunity to the participants to ask questions. So please feel free to raise your hand or to type in a question in the questions part. And because we would like to hear if what Jeff just presented resonates with your view on the topic of abuse online and also DNS abuse, and how to handle this. So we would like to hear from you your thoughts on the presentation. So don't be shy, and please feel free to raise your hand or to type in your question or comment in the question part. So the first question is, are the slides available online? Jeff, if you are fine with that, we are happy to distribute the slides after the webinar to all participants.
Certainly can be, yes.
So this is also a very good practice, best practice of webinars, that we provide the material after the webinar. So yes, we can do this. Are there any other further questions? So there's one question. This is for you, Jeff. How do you feel about reports without evidence, but only with suspects of abuse?
So again, in that scenario, the domain has been reported with the type of abuse, but no evidence to the abuse. I think that's what they're indicating. How do I feel about them? Well, I'm not particularly thrilled about them because they basically mean that an opportunity has been missed potentially to take out a potential DNS harm, because what we're required to do is go and try and evidence that domain now and see if we can replicate what the alleged actions were that made the abuse happen. And if that no longer exists because it was temporal, they put the domain up, they did the abuse, they took it back down for a bit, and they're going to bring it back up again, or it was all in MX records. And so if they didn't capture the actual email traffic it themselves, we don't have the evidence. It's not as good as we'd like. Is it better than not getting the report? Certainly. But evidence packages really help quickly mitigate the abuses, where unevidenced reports can be a very low rate of action based on no evidence to act upon.
Thank you. I think maybe it's also always a question of who the reporter actually is. Are we in a scenario that is inside the industry, B2B, for example? But we also know that you are working on the project that's called NetBeacon, which should provide more opportunity also for average users to send in abuse reports. And I guess the broader public is maybe not that familiar with how to put together a well-evidenced and a well-drafted abuse report. So also maybe from that perspective, there is still a lot of potential to educate about which types of abuse you can see out there, and how to identify them and how to provide well evidence. So, but thank you for that question. Do we have other questions from the floor?
Well, I'll mention quickly, Lars, we're waiting for another question, is that with NetBeacon, so CleanDNS has donated our technology to the DNS Abuse Institute for the purpose of NetBeacon, which is a common abuse reporting tool. What it does is it basically assists somebody reporting an abuse through the evidencing process by, you first select the type of abuse you're reporting, and it gives you definitions, and then it allows you to then go through the step of putting each piece of evidence in that's required to make it a well-evidenced case before it's submitted. So to your point, it does help even the casual victim of an abuse have a methodology for reporting it all the way through to carriers and cybersecurity companies, because it's as long as the evidence is presented, it can be validated and be utilized.
And now we have the next question. How can we increase the incentives to report abuse and in an evidence-based structure? I think NetBeacon already addresses one part of the question, but
sure. Incentivization is always key. I think that, in my humble opinion, for many years now, the main reporting mechanisms to report cybercrime have been with governments. And in most cases, those reports go into statistical reports on, well, there's this number reported, this number reported. But the reality is the crime sizes, as far as losses, are very small. Even if it's an $8,000 loss, that's not going to meet a prosecutorial threshold for action in almost any jurisdiction. So I think the incentivization is to see that actions are taken. And that's one of the things that when I talk to potential reporters to report into NetBeacon or to CleanDNS, say that by reporting to us a well-evidenced report, it will more likely, if it is a type of technical abuse, result in an action which is a mitigation or a disruption of that domain's ability to harm people. So it's not just reporting it so it goes into a statistic somewhere or the uniform crime report. It's actually going into a process whereby the domain can be acted upon. And the nice thing about NetBeacon with CleanDNS is any report, for example, that CleanDNS gets of a domain that we cannot act upon because it's not our client, not our customer, we relay that report right through NetBeacon so it goes into the right hands of the right party so it can be acted upon.
Thank you. The next question is, DNS abuse can be costly for victims. Is there any progress to convincing enforcers that the potential punishments should be truly proportionate to the financial, never mind the others, loss incurred?
So the loss, I'm not sure I follow the question entirely. To the victims, to the victim company, to the providers, to the criminal, where I'm not sure where that goes.
Maybe I leave out the comments that have been included. So DNS abuse can be costly for victims. Is there any progress to convincing enforcers that the potential punishments should be truly proportionate to the financial loss incurred?
Oh, okay. I understand now. So I think that the ability to correlate the abuses across the ecosystem, across registrars, registries, CCTLDs, GTLDs, to show the larger patterns so that there is the ability to say all these losses at the 1,000 euros to $10,000 were the same cybercrime network. Thus, the losses have now crossed the prosecutorial thresholds to be acted upon is really the way to address that problem. Because if we can then take that data set and use it to provide to law enforcement so that it is an ability to take that data and prosecute the bad guys, that's going to be the key. Because they're not going to have the resources to the courts or the law or the justice systems across the world to be prosecuting I think it's $6 trillion anticipated by 2025 in cybercrime losses. But those losses are rarely passing 6 figures per incident. Most of those losses are in the 4 figures to 5 figures. We have to basically figure out how to correlate that data and present it as a prosecutable package across the world so those jurisdictions can actually take action upon cyber criminals.
Thank you. We've got another question, and this addresses one of the main topics that we not only discuss at topDNS, but which is discussed at every initiative that's currently taking care of the topic of DNS abuse. And it is, isn't reporting far too slow to prevent a significant number of users from getting harmed?
So it depends on the methodology of reporting, and it depends on the methodology of receiving the reports at the infrastructure. I do find that when reports come out, to the earlier question, unevidenced, that adds a lot of time and effort to affirm, reinvestigate, and that can take days, especially if you think of an inbound load at a big registrar or a big registry taking these reports, as well as a unstructured report, such as an email narrative that's basically 3 pages long describing how grandma got catfished from somebody in Nigeria. The details have to be pulled out, and then they have to be cross-referenced and have to be evidenced. So I think that a well-evidenced report does allow for the mean time to drop. When CleanDNS first started doing the work we're doing, we saw the average time between report of an abuse and a takedown or mitigation of abuse being about 96 hours. And now the mean is 48 hours, with many of them coming down within hours. So, well-evidenced reports can allow for a much more rapid takedown and reduced victimization.
Thank you. The next question is there a line to be drawn between abuse, harms, and brand infringement?
That's not a hard line. I would say it's a very light gray line. And the reason I say that is the majority of laws used into online harms and DNS abuses, such as phishing and farming, are brands. They're using the name of the bank, the logo of the bank, the e-commerce platform's name, logo. They're using the social media platform, the tech company's logo. So the laws are brand infringement. being drawn into, to use or draw someone into a technical abuse or a DNS abuse. So I don't think it's a hard line. I think it's a very soft line. But of course, surely, a domain that's set up to allege to sell a particular brand of luxury good, and then that luxury good delivered is a knockoff, but the site is pretending to be the real thing. I think that's a different level that potentially could have evidencing moved up into the model, but not necessarily to be acted upon at the DNS level, but maybe at the hosting or other levels.
Thank you. So I don't see any further questions in the questions part, and I also don't see any other hands raised. So if you would like to ask a question, please take the opportunity now. And there it is. Is there any movement towards some kind of an information structure that would allow an easy way for a victim to understand how to be effective in reporting abuse? For example, a 911 in the US or a 112 in Europe? Good question.
That is a very good question. I would say that NetBeacon is a first step toward that, but that only applies to things to be reported that are less mobile in a world which has become significantly more mobile in the technology we utilize. So I think that is a next place to go, is where most carriers take reports where you can say this is junk or this is a scam, and you can report the bad message to them. But as far as reporting it for mitigation or to be gathered by law enforcement, I think that's another opportunity where an evidencing standard can be applied and a framework can be applied to get those types of reports in so better mitigation can happen.
Thank you. The follow-up comment is, I suppose that the 911 or equivalent standard simply go to a website in the beginning. So,
well, the reality is if you get a scam on your mobile device, it would be nice to be able to say, forward this to 6532, which is the fraud recipient, and then basically all the details of the package that was sent to you get forwarded on to, again, to ease the process of reporting. So I still think it's a great idea. And also pulling someone into a website to retype things from something they're seeing on their phone when they only have one screen is going to be a friction point that'll probably make people not do it. It takes too much effort. You want to make it as frictionless as possible to get as much detail as possible.
yes, and there's one comment from a participant that we can also take the opportunity right here, right now, to point out that next to the topDNS initiative, ECO is also running one of the tip lines of the InHope network. So if you stumble upon abusive content online, but also CSAM, there are also places to go. And ECO, for example, for CSAM also offers the opportunity to send in anonymous reports because this is lowering the barrier for people to report these types of very serious abuses. So thank you for pointing out. Yes, this is also another range and service that we can point out to. So thank you for this. If there are no further questions from the floor, I'm also not refraining from giving you a few minutes back of your time for today, and maybe also spend them outside to enjoy the good weather. And I would like to. And I would like to take the opportunity again to invite you to the next webinar of this series that I mentioned in the very beginning. So part 3 of this topDNS best practice webinar series will take place on the 10th of August. It will be a Thursday, where Theo Gertz from Real Time Register will explain how to investigate abuses online with free tools. And there are and there is somebody typing and asking for another moment. So I can see that you're still typing. I've been asked to spell out child sexual abuse material instead of just saying CSAM. So also to a clarification at this end. So CSAM is about child sexual abuse material. So thank you also for this comment. You're welcome. Okay. If there are no other further questions, I would like to thank everybody for joining. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for your many questions. I think this was a great discussion. Jeff, thank you very much for your presentation. I think this was very interesting, very helpful, also to facilitate further discussions on this topic. And again, you're more than welcome, and we'll be very pleased to welcome you again on the 10th of August for the next topDNS best practice webinar. And with this, this meeting is adjourned. And thank you very much, everybody, for attending. And please participate in the survey, which will be shown right after the meeting. Thank you very much. Have a nice afternoon.
Thank you. Cheers.